And now, from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word, another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. Today is Friday, January 28th, 2022. And wow, we are already through the first month of the year already. Can you believe that? Wow, things are happening really, really fast, and I'm going to get right into it today. We're going to begin with entering the lean years. How does it happen? You know, we've been covering a lot about this information, the story about lean years, but today we want to ask the question. We're going to carry a little bit further now. How do you get into lean years? How do you go from a nation as rich and blessed and as plentiful as we are and deteriorate into periods of lean? And what does that mean, the lean years? Then we're going to take one segment of that. We're going to go into actually growing the U.S. debt. Is there any way out? In other words, we have spent ourselves into poverty and we can't find any way to get out of this. And the solution is just print more money. Just out of thin air, just print more money. And that's how it's going to get us through the mess that we're in today. Then we're going to finish our program today with our third part of 12th Night and its connection to Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras is the missing link that ties in Christmas and Easter, pulls it all together. We call it Satan's Holy Trinity of the holiday season. All right, let's get right into the program now because we've got a lot to cover. Where are we now? We're in January 2022. Where are we in timeline of prophecy and discerning the times? You know, Jesus actually addressed that question with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and it's covered in the book of Matthew chapter 16, verses 1 through 3. The Pharisees, also with the Sadducees, came and tempting him that he would show them a sign from heaven. He answered and said to them, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and lowering. He said, you hypocrites, you can discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. So we're in that period of time right now that religious leaders, government leaders, world leaders around the world, they all understand that we are in a period of time of problems, just like they can tell the weather, but they don't know how to fix it. In other words, they don't understand what's going on. And how can you when you call wrong right? So we're going to talk about that today. We're actually going to go and begin with telling this story from where we left off over the last couple weeks. And it's in a timeline in the chart that you're looking at right here. And in that timeline, we always began with the blood moon tetrad in 2015, the Pope coming in, and the possibility of Satan's removal in 2013. So now, what I want to do now is I'm going to take that segment of the 14 years period up to 15th year, and then now we're going to move it. We're going to take it and move it into an enlarged 7-year period. So now, I put a star there that we're right there in 2022, but what does that mean? So if we looked ahead, the one thing we do know that we're going to have to move into the time before Christ returns of the seals. Revelation talks about 7 seals and eventually the 7 trumps and the last trump and the return of Jesus Christ at the last trump. I'm going to throw you a question out here. I didn't think about this earlier, but I just thought about it now. When Christ comes and that 7th trump sounds, all the dead in Christ will rise first, as 1 Corinthians says, right? If you're a new person here, or you're sharing this with a family member who is nominal Protestant, and those dead rise in Christ, who are they? The bigger question is, how are they still in the grave if they're in heaven or if they're in hell? You see, that's a real problem. The world can't answer that question. But if you want to know more about it, you need to write in. We'll be able to help you understand that question about heaven and hell. But anyway, that's a side point, but let's move on now. We're in the period now of what we're looking at is leading into the time of the seal. So we're at that period of time. Look what Deuteronomy 28:21 says. And the Lord shall make the pestilence cleave unto you until he have consumed you from off the land. Well, we seem to have been moved into that period now with COVID-19. Just this morning, we're taping this on Tuesday morning. Just this morning, they announced that the Omicron now, the variant of Omicron, now has a variant of Omicron. Now that's beginning to show its ugly head. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was in the state of Washington that they began to see this now. And it's beginning to move and spread again, just as Omicron did. With that, they're also telling us that we're in a period of time now where it's very rich for this to continue to evolve into more variants. So in other words, what this scripture is telling us here in Deuteronomy, a period of cursings from God, is now we're in that stage. So now we know that much, that we're probably right there because this isn't leaving. And in modern times, we have not had this. Even in 1917, it went away. This doesn't appear that it's going to leave from what they're telling us. And we know we're not where I just pulled up. You see right here? All right, let's pull that up on the screen, Jeff. That fourth part now, Revelation 8, verse 6, where a fourth part of the earth is going to be destroyed. Now, we're not there yet. So if we were looking at the skies and discerning the times, we're somewhere between Deuteronomy 28 and 21 and Revelation 6, 8 in that period of time frame. All right, so this is what we've covered in the past. We know that once that happens, it's going to lead to the persecution of the elect in the 3.5 years of tribulation. So now let's ask a question here. The Bible, if the Bible holds true to its dualities, before reaching the state of captivity, we will have a period of time referred to as lean years. So what am I talking about? If you're new to the Bible, you understand that there is duality throughout the scriptures. All right, there's a form of the latter, the physical, the spiritual, the duality throughout. The children of Israel went into captivity in Egypt. Remember that period of time that you were all seeing the movie, The Ten Commandments, and Moses bringing them all out. But it's Joseph who got the revelation from God and warned them that they eventually going to be 7 years of plenty. So he told them during that period of time, you need to store up for the 7 years of lean. Now, we've been saying that now for about 7 years. When you look at 2022, there's no doubt that we are moving into a period now that there's an alarm going off. We have got serious issues, and we're beginning to lose any sovereignty that we've ever had. All right, so that's what we're looking at. The big problem is the Bible doesn't tell us in the end time there'll be 7 years. But it's obvious that if you're going to move into the time of all these seals, pestilence, famine, wars, it's going to drain the finances. You're going to go into years of lean. When you get to where a fourth part of the earth is destroyed, you're definitely in lean. Whether it's 7 years or not, we don't know. When does it actually begin to take place, all this? We don't know exactly, but it seems to be pretty close. All right, so now let's move on. The second thing is how. How does all of this actually happen? The Bible shows there's several ways. Curses is one of them, but also no godly leadership. You know, God tells us and warns us that this godly leadership is just not going to be there. So in type, the Bible shows that there are years of lean that lead Israel into captivity. So what are we looking for? So what are some of the signs that we're looking for that's going to lead us into that period of time? When we look at that and we try to address the question, where are we with all of this? And we go back to the question from Jesus that was discerning the times. Look what God says when we add to that 1 Corinthians 1, 19 and 20. It is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise. I will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise, he asked? Where's the scribe? Where's the disputer of this world? Has not God made the foolish of this the wisdom of this world? So what are we looking at today? We look at these leaders, these supposed leaders that we vote into office or they appoint as this incredible wisdom of people who continues to bring us into this cases of chaos. You look at the decisions they make and you say, what is he thinking? You know, knowing it's like every move they make is another step into destruction. So what are we looking at? Well, I want to address that today. And I'm actually going to begin it with a question right here that you can't make this up. Destroying the wisdom of the wise. Now, here's the debate, and you're not going to believe this. Our crew hasn't seen this either. Here's the debate. Who can attend an all-women's college? Remember the question, like when you grew up, it's like, who's buried in Grant's tomb? Grant. You would think, who can attend a women's college? Women. Oh no. We got the most intelligent minds of Earth telling us who can attend that college. Jeff, let's play that video.
Now NPR has taken up the vital topic of gender identity at elite women's colleges. Holy smokes. It's a cornucopia of awesome. Listen.
Women's colleges are adapting their admissions policies to reflect a shift in the way that people understand gender. Some students identify as transgender or non-binary, not exclusively male or female. So who belongs at a women's college?
Who belongs at a women's college? Well, that's an incisive question, really. NPR has a way of crystallizing these things. These are the kinds of debates consuming Hollins University, formerly Hollins College, in the state of Virginia. So NPR went to the scene to provide breathless moment-to-moment coverage of this controversy. Listen.
Here's how Hollins' latest admissions policy works. If you're a transgender woman, you can apply. If you're a trans man, no. But if you transition to male after you get to Hollins, you can stay. And that's an important shift. Before 2019, if you transitioned while at Hollins, you'd have to transfer out. Finally, if you're non-binary, Hollins says no. Your application will not be accepted. To be admitted, you have to, quote, consistently live and identify as a woman. And that's messed up, says sophomore Willow Seymour, who is genderqueer.
So it's pretty simple at Hollins. Transgender women are welcome, transgender men are not. But then there's the question of the non-binary. They seem to be excluded too. And this, not surprisingly, has the genderqueer community quite upset. Wait a second. What's a genderqueer? Well, NPR never explains that. You're supposed to know the answer. Though, of course, nobody actually does know the answer. No one has any freaking idea, including the news editors at NPR, because the term genderqueer is completely mysterious. It has no actual definition. In fact, it's more a litmus test than it is a word. But that doesn't mean it's not real. The genderqueers at Hollins are on the warpath over the non-binary admissions controversy. And the enraged include genderqueer sophomore Willow Seymour. Listen.
Personally, I think it's pretty offensive to exclude non-binary people. I know that historically it's a women's college, but a lot of people see it as like a refuge from patriarchal structures, and non-binary people deserve to be as much part of that as anyone else.
But Willow Seymour isn't the only angry Hollins community member that NPR interviewed. Here's someone identified as M. Miller. Now, we're guessing M was once known as Emily when she showed up at Hollins, but not anymore. Now M. Miller goes by plural pronouns. It'd be interesting to hear what their parents think of that. But sadly, NPR didn't bother to interview M's parents and said it was all about M. Listen.
Hi, my name is M. Miller. I use they, them pronouns. I am a senior, and I am from Amelia, Virginia.
Miller will often serve as a sounding board for younger students who want to try out new pronouns or a new name.
There's kind of this like wading pool area where you kind of just dip your toes in and you see how you feel about it, and then you go further.
Hi, my name is M. Miller. I use they, them pronouns. Well, of course you do, M. Miller. That's why you're on NPR.
All right, let's move on now. The conditions, 2022, the conditions in the United States. And boy, are we in the need of a spiritual solution. Right now, crime is growing at an alarming speed all over. No matter where you look, all the news, left and right, doesn't matter what channel you watch now, everybody is concerned about the alarming speed. Look how many policemen have been shot and killed already in the line of duty just this year alone. Last year was a record, by the way. Now there's another one growing right now in 2022. Homelessness is growing at an alarming speed. Now, we're going to show you the same geniuses who create that question of who can attend a women's college are leading this also, homelessness. We got 2 segments in video. They're going to show you how they're fixing the solution for homelessness. Wait till you see that. Inflation is at its highest level in 50 years. The U.S. debt is at its highest area in every area of our economy. The debt's growing, personal, school, businesses. Debt's growing, and that's on top of trillions of dollars that's being given out. Debt continues to grow. Global debt is at an all-time high. COVID is creating global bankruptcy across the globe. Highest illegal border crossings ever in the United States, over 2 million. 2 million illegal crossings in the United States 1 year. And these people have to be supported somewhere. Wars, rumors of wars. Just this morning now, the whole world is on high alert for Russia going into the Ukraine. And many of the countries over there, including the United States now, are preparing to send thousands of troops in the area and the region to try to stop all of this. Famines, pestilence are growing at unprecedented rates all around the globe. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg. These are just the headlines that are out there right now. Every one of these things can be taken and broken into an entire segment like I'm doing today in each one of them. Today we're going to primarily take the crime and just show you the tip of the iceberg on homelessness. But every one of these deserves some time. The growing U.S. debt. In the wake of the financial crisis in 2008, the U.S. government launched one of the largest stimulus packages in the country's history. They created $1.4 trillion, just created it, printed the money, put it out there. It wasn't going to cost anybody anything. Shelled out to prop up industries to save jobs and get people spending again after the housing and the stock market crisis. Up to that time, that was one of the highest stimulances ever to get the economy going. However, since COVID-19, we have raised and spent over $5 trillion. $5 trillion. That's over 4 times what we did in 2008. And we're being told that's not going to cost anybody any money. No extra taxes. It's all being taken care of. How about this one? The national debt is growing at an unprecedented rate and more spending is coming. All right, now let's take a look at that. What we've been doing here in News Nuggets and Insights, and what I've done now for several years, and going all the way back on this one here to 2017, and I use 2017 January 20th because that's when presidents take office. So I decided to be fair and look at things from a January 20th, 12 o'clock, by the way, time clock. So every one of these is at 12 o'clock on January 20th. 2017 is when President Trump took office. In 2020 was the last year before COVID that he took office. And during his presidency, he went up just about $2 trillion, all right? Just about $2 trillion. But look what it was when he handed over the office just 1 year later to President Biden. When President Biden took office, the debt had jumped to $27 trillion, almost 28. And that was because of the COVID and all the money they had to spend to get things rolling. Well, there you go. Look at how fast things grew in just that 1 year. So from 2017 to 2020, debt increased $1.98 trillion. From there, 20 to 21, it grew $5.8 trillion. Unbelievable. But during this 4-year period of time, it took President Obama 8 years to create that much debt after the 2008 debacle that we had back then. So it's like we're cutting things in half and we're doubling in half the time, our debt. So now, how about today? Now, 2022, we're at $29 trillion. All right, $29.8 trillion we're at right now. So if I went now from 2021 to 2022 during the Biden administration, in just 1 year, he has raised it over $2 trillion. Now, here's the problem with that. There's a lot more debt that they have put on the books that hasn't showed up yet. What they did in these last trillions of dollars of help they're going to give us, it didn't come now. It comes now over the next 4 to 8 years. So how does that help today? Well, it doesn't help today, but it doesn't look as bad. But it's already on the books. It's coming. It's already been passed. We're going to spend it. We just got to print it so we can spend it. That means that debt is increasing by $1.5 million. Let me repeat that. $1.5 million every minute. You got that? Every minute that goes by, our debt is increasing $1.5 million. We got the debt clock. In case you've never seen it, we're going to run it for about a minute. Let's run that debt clock, Jeff. That's amazing, huh? That was only 1 minute. And you see how fast things are rolling up? Every minute of every day, it rolls up. There's no cure for this. They can't raise enough taxes. They can't spend enough. I mean, they can't take in enough to pay for it. So inflation is growing. By creating all the money that we're spending, we've got a bigger problem now. December, the PPI, Producer Price Index, that's the wholesale level, was up to 9.7%. That's 10% over what it was a year ago. 9.7%. That means that you have not seen the end of the rise in prices that's going to hit the shelves or gas. The December CPI, the Consumer Price Index, was up by 7.9%. So when the government tells you how well you're doing, that you're making more money than last year, the average 4% or 5% raise, you've still lost 4 or 5%. So it's funny money when they tell you these stories of what's going on. The real money now is when you actually have, at the end of the week, after your paycheck, how much do you have left? That's the real question. All right, let's move on. All right, the national debt. Hang on a second. All right. All right, you ready? All right, you ready? Let's move on. All right, here we go. The national debt not making big news, but that's the problem. The data from the U.S. Treasury Department shows that the federal debt has jumped approximately $23,350 for every tax-paying household during Joe Biden's first year in office. Try to imagine that. Somebody's going to pay for the debt that comes from taxpayers. So every household who's paying taxes, your debt just went up by $23,000, whether you knew it or not. At some point in time, somebody's going to pay for it. If not you, your children, or your grandchildren, if we're still here. All right, more debt is coming. The debt already passed by Congress is not on the books yet. Biden's infrastructure bill will add another $1.9 trillion, not there yet. The debt bill is not yet passed by Congress that they're still trying to pass is the Families Bill, another $2 trillion, and the Green New Deal, which is an idiotic $10 trillion. And they're trying to get all this done within the next 10 years. That's another $12 trillion. So now, how do you understand all this? Well, the government says, well, the inflation and the debt we have is just transitory. Well, that's not true, because their own Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, just acknowledged that it's not true. He said to the Senate Banking Committee that stubbornly high inflation might stick around for quite some time. Indeed, he said, the fact that inflation no longer looks transitory increases the odds that the central bank will be wrapping up the taper for our asset purchases sooner rather than later. We're taping on Tuesday morning. Sometime Tuesday afternoon, we will probably see our first raise in interest rate. And because of that, the stock market's really crazy right now. Yesterday it went down 1,000 points, almost 1,100 points, and it ended up in the green. And today when I left the home, it was down about 600 points today. So everybody's really nervous about what's going to actually take place. So now, one thing we know, more debt is coming. This is from Stanberry Research, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about who they are. They reach 280 million people in over 200 countries. It's one of the biggest financial firms out there who analyzes debt and money and where it goes and who's doing what. Look what they said. This just came out just a couple days ago. We got bad news for the so-called cancel culture. You see this chart here? This is the debt to GDP ratio. With what's already on the books, if they don't add any more debt, even without all the new spending, the national debt will approach $89 trillion by 2029. I don't know if that could be possible. Do you? According to their figures, that's where we're heading to. By 2029, when everything we have already just passed finally hits the books and it is spent, eventually that's going to bring us to a debt ratio of 277%. That's unsustainable. We are beyond the point of no return. You know, the rest of the world can see these charts too, and they know something's coming. That would put the country's debt to GDP at 277%. That means we have 3 times more debt on the books than we get money coming in or produce. Unbelievable, but it's true. The euro challenges the dollar as we go into currency. The value of the global payment and transitions in euro has been inching up that the United States dollar, and this came from the SWIFT International Payment Book, shows us that is hinting at increased activity around the currency. In October 2020, last year, the euro's transactions even slid ahead of the US dollars. See, the dollar is the U.S. currency of balance, where everybody uses the U.S. dollars to pay debt and transfer money. We're seeing less and less of that. And then they're showing, excuse me, last year in October, more people use the euro than the dollar. When it reaches the point that the rest of the world says we no longer trust the dollar, we will move into a depression and we'll never recover from that. The world is moving to that right now as we speak. And you need to be aware of that. That's what's going on right now. What are we looking at? Global coming collapse unless the U.S. stops printing money. All right, these are headlines. The dollar will collapse. This is a warning. It's not an if, it will. The gold-backed yuan, Beijing greenlights the purchase of billions of dollars in gold. So they're using gold as a standard where everybody can feel safe. So right now, everything is moving it toward looking like the yuan is going to be the money of choice, or the euro. But that's what they're looking at. The IMF reported that the global share of the dollar-dominated exchange reserves have dropped to 59% in the fourth quarter of 2020, said this matched the 25-year low in 1995. That report came out in May 17, 2021. So in other words, everything's shifting from the U.S. dollar, and nobody's paying attention to it, or they're not telling you. All right, so this is the chart where we were before about where is the wise? How come nobody can see this? Why are they not making choices that are going to fix this instead of not? Well, they cannot discern the times. Their own greed has brought them to a point of no return. Now, let's keep that in mind now. Let's go a little bit further. Look what God says in Proverbs 6. He says, how long will you sleep, O sluggard? Will you arise out of your sleep? Yet a little sleep and a little slumber and a little folding of hands to sleep. And so your poverty will come as one who travails in the want of an armed man. So God says, because we have lazy people telling us what to do, we're in a bad shape of mind. Look at this one here. This was a headline, "A World Steeped in Iniquity." This is a quote. Our country has been taken over by a gang of lazy, entitled brats who would rather take money from us than earn it themselves. The summer 2020, in places like Minneapolis, Portland, St. Louis, and right outside my publisher's office here in Baltimore, these folks will happily use violence to get their way. We have become what our forefathers have feared, a nation of takers in a socialist country. It goes on. There's one number, they said, that proves it. Right now, nearly 2 out of every 3 Americans is a net tax recipient. That means 2/3 of the countries get more in government benefits than they pay. They said this is the slippery slope of American socialism. Socialists seek to put government in total control, and they believe that the bureaucrats know more about what's good for you than you do. All right, this is from Stanberry Research. This is the quote that they put out to 280 million people in over 200 countries. So now, he said, let's look at just one socialist way of fixing the problem, homelessness. I got 2 videos. This is where the brilliant leaders are fixing homelessness. One's 4 minutes and one's 3 minutes. Let's play the first one.
City officials across the country no longer had an obligation to protect the public and public spaces from drug addicts who decided to live in them. At the same time, politicians suddenly had access to a massive new source of cash. Taxpayer money, many billions in taxpayer money, for something called homelessness prevention. Now, what is homelessness prevention? Well, of course, it's the opposite of what they call it, as always. Here's Seattle's interpretation of homelessness prevention.
A handful of Seattle's more than 12,000 homeless will soon be going from the street to a new apartment with stunning views of the Space Needle and Puget Sound. Using part of its share of the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, the city bought 3 brand new apartment buildings for $50 million for 165 homeless, a price of $300,000 per unit. In Los Angeles, Skid Row is about to get a new neighbor, a 19-story high-rise for homeless, costing taxpayers $160 million or $580,000 per unit. They're part of an expensive push to get the homeless off of sidewalks and out of city parks and into government-subsidized housing, even if it means buying new buildings at market rate from developers.
Oh, stunning views of the Space Needle and Puget Sound. Do you have one of those? Well, crackheads do. More than $500,000 per apartment to house drug addicts at public expense, at market rates. So you can see why real estate developers would strongly support a program like that, and of course they strongly do. But luxury apartments are just the beginning. Seattle's most recent municipal budget allocates more than $150 million to other so-called homelessness programs just this year. Now keep in mind, Seattle has fewer than 750,000 people living there. So that's an awful lot of money per bum. It's certainly a lot more than anyone else is getting in Seattle. At the same time it was giving overpriced condos to drug addicts with stunning views of Puget Sound, Seattle allocated just $10 million total for its small business stabilization fund designed to keep family businesses from going bankrupt during the COVID lockdowns. So the city's priorities could not be clearer than that. You lavish money on the least productive, most antisocial parasites in our society, and then you punish Americans who work for a living. Got it? And it's hardly just Seattle. The latest city budget in San Francisco proposes spending $667 million on something called the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. And yet, at the very same time, San Francisco's Department of Children, Youth, and Families gets less than half that amount. A city program designed to help low-income families pay college tuition gets just $16 million total. That's about 2% of what the homeless get. So in San Francisco, it makes sense. In fact, it pays to get high on the sidewalk. Don't bother to get an education. Nobody cares. That's the message from the city. Couldn't be clearer. In Austin, Texas, the city's budget for homelessness assistance was $68 million last year. At the very same time, the city of Austin spent just $3.5 million in new loans for struggling small businesses and only $7 million for, quote, mission-critical infrastructure and deferred maintenance at city facilities, like the things that matter. And at the same time as this was going on, the police department in the city of Austin got an $11 million budget cut. So what happened to the homelessness in Austin, the problem they were trying to, quote, solve? Well, to no one's surprise, it has grown by 10% in just 2 years. You get what you pay for. When you pay for homelessness, you get a lot more of it. See how that works? In Los Angeles, politicians have spent billions, quote, fighting homelessness. This has been accompanied, of course, by a massive increase in the number of people who are homeless. 4 years ago, the city spent $440 million on what it called solutions to homelessness. That was supposed to fix the problem. Did it? Homelessness in Los Angeles jumped 15% just last year. So this year, LA will spend more, close to $1 billion on the homeless in 2022. As for the small businesses crushed by the city's lunatic COVID restrictions, you ask? What'll they get? Well, they get $62 million total. The city's gang reduction program gets about half that.
You might have to back it up and listen to that again, because he went through that really fast. It's like, try to compare the amount of money that they're spending versus the people in the communities who are productive and families and businesses versus what they're giving for the homeless. Where's all that money going? Imagine you get a $500,000 apartment and be homeless. Never have to work, never have to raise food, money. Everything's taken care of. Quite nice if you can get it. All right, now I got a second video. It talks about something more than just the homeless. It talks about the wisdom of taking care of the drug problem. Let's play that video.
What you're watching here is civilization collapsing in real time. And it's not new. Here's video our producer shot in Los Angeles in the spring of 2019, almost 3 years ago. It shows homeless encampments downtown on 3 separate blocks. It starts at 5th and San Pedro, and then it goes west, seemingly forever. So in January of 2020, the LA Times reported that, quote, California's railroad tracks are now lined with men and women sleeping in tents or under cardboard boxes. In America, by the way. Well, in response to this, Governor Gavin Newsom announced another $12 billion in state funding to, quote, fight homelessness. How'd that work? We'll hear the results.
From Skyfox, the images are startling. Thousands of empty or damaged packages lining the tracks along the Union Pacific LA Railway. Amazon packages, UPS boxes, all meant for delivery to customers along the West Coast. They're opened by cargo thieves who take advantage of the trains stopping or slowing down to break into the containers. Union Pacific officials saying they've had a 160% increase in cargo thefts in the LA County area, with over 90 containers broken into every day.
So I guess they didn't clean up the railroad tracks. $12 billion and disorder got worse. But of course, allowing people to live outside and defecate outside in public places and use drugs outside in front of our children is both the cause and a symptom of growing disorder and chaos. It's the degradation of what holds us together as a civilization. You will not believe this is America, the country you grew up in. This is what California got for $12 billion. Not fewer homeless, just better funded homeless, and thousands more of them. In New York, officials have given drug addicts priority over virtually everyone else in the city. A lot of working poor in New York. We ought to be celebrating them. The city isn't. It's ignoring them. In 2015, the annual budget of the New York City Department of Homeless Services was $950 million. This year, it's double that. It's about $2 billion. Now, how much is that? Well, what they're spending on the homeless in New York City is more than the city's entire public university system, more than they get to educate far more people. So the homeless are getting more per student to live outside and smoke meth. Is that creating fewer homeless? Probably not. In fact, New York's homeless population is now at its highest level since the Great Depression. So where's all this money going specifically? Now, we could do 5 hours on this, but here's just one example. That money is going to an overdose prevention center, preventing overdoses, which in fact means helping the homeless get high.
Officially called an overdose prevention center, it's a place where users can snort, smoke, swallow, or inject illegal drugs in a controlled environment. 2 centers in East Harlem and Washington Heights are the first in the nation to allow supervised drug use. The head of an East Harlem community organization says the facility and a nearby methadone clinic have led to an unwanted influx of addicts.
They all come here from different areas of the city. We never had this around here. No matter how bad it was through the 60s, all of that, we never had this around here.
This is insane. You know, they used to use a definition of insanity as doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. You would think that sooner or later somebody would say, this isn't working. Billions here, billions there, and now they can't seem to fix it. So what they do, they help them. but we're going to keep it under a controlled area. But once the people get high, they turn them loose to the streets. Then what? Well, we're seeing it. Brutal beatings, deaths, murders, rapes. In all of the major areas, you're seeing that grow more and more. And now the taxpayer, you're paying for it. How's it working? Look what the Bible says. There's many, believe it or not, if you went to the computer and you type in sluggard, boy, the Bible covers this a lot. Proverbs 24:30-34 says, I went by the fields of the slothful and by the vineyard of a man void of understanding. And lo, it was all overgrown with thorns and nettles and had covered the face thereof. And the stone wall thereof was broken down. Then I saw and I considered it well. And I looked upon it and received instruction. Yet a little sleep and a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, and so shall your poverty come as one that travails, and your want as an armed man. That's what we're looking at, because you see, we're not putting people to work. No longer as you don't work, you don't eat. Now we give people money to stay home. We pay the poverty to live on the street. Now we're even paying for their drugs if need be. We're buying $1 million condos and putting them in, and they'll never change. You get what you pay for, as we just seen. All right, let's take a break now. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about part 3 of Mardi Gras and its connection to Easter and Christmas, and it's part 3, the final segment. So we're going to play that right after this video. And this video here is called God-Sized Dreams. Take a look and we'll be back in just a little bit. I went a lot over time than I wanted to do for that first segment, but it was important. I feel very passionate about the information that I was sharing with you with the persecution and also with the financial picture, because so many of God's people are not prepared for what's coming, and they really need to be prepared. And so in the next few weeks, we'll go through all of those things. All right, so let's talk about Mardi Gras, its connection, and talk about the plan of God. So this is the third session, and we're going to talk about now the timeline for Mardi Gras. Okay, here's the timeline, and we're going to put it to the plan of God. So December 25th to January 6th is called 12th night. So we talked about that earlier, so this is a review slide here. Brings us to Mardi Gras, and then as you know, we talked about Mardi Gras, that you cannot point the date for Mardi Gras from Christmas or 12th night. You literally have to go to Easter. So when you try to do it from Christmas, you got a real problem. You cannot establish a time from Christmas to 12th night to set the time for Mardi Gras. To find that time for Fat Tuesday, you must establish the time for Easter and count back ways. Very interesting, you have to count back ways, and you count backwards actually 7 weeks. Literally, it's 47 days, or 46 days, I'm sorry, and they call it the 40 days of Lent. And they use the 40 days of Lent, which talks about the fasting of Christ for 40 days, but they don't count Sunday. All right, so you have 40 days plus the 6 Sundays in between. Very reminiscent of God's plan. From the wave sheath, God counts 7 weeks forward, even to the morrow after the 7th week is 50 days, brings you to Pentecost. So here we have where God is beginning at Passover and bringing you forward to fruit, producing fruit. Satan has devised a plan to put back ways to Mardi Gras focused on him and his plan. So now, the date of Easter, this is how Easter is calculated in case you didn't know this, has nothing to do with Passover, the death of Jesus Christ. Absolutely amazing. The most important day of their year has nothing to do with Christ. This is how they calculate it. The date of Easter Sunday is calculated to be kept on the first Sunday after the first full moon occurring on or after the spring equinox. That's how it's calculated. Has nothing to do with Passover. Right? That's how you calculate Easter. So now that brings you back to Mardi Gras. Now what's interesting here is Mardi Gras now, that's the connection, that's the central missing link for the plan of salvation, the plan of destruction by Satan. So in the past, we viewed the individual events not on a larger single plan. In other words, we looked at 12th night as one event, Fat Tuesday as an event, and Lent and Easter another event. However, when you put them together, you see a bigger plan. Just like with God, you have the spring season, and you have Pentecost, and you have the fall. Each one has a specific purpose, but they all tie in together to a larger plan. So does Satan. So what are we looking at? This is God's plan, as we covered in the past, Deuteronomy 16:16, 3 times in the year we come before him. So now, let's look at Satan's plan. The first season he has is Christmas, bringing you to 12th night. Then you have the last part of the season, Lent, bringing you all the way to Easter. In the middle is Fat Tuesday, and so there we have Satan's 3 seasons, all tying together from supposedly the birth of Christ to supposedly the crucifixion of Christ, when never was born on that day, and the Easter has nothing to do with Christ's crucifixion. All right, so we've gone through all that before. Fat Tuesday is the link that connects them all. That's the central point of bringing everything together. The period from Christmas all the way to Fat Tuesday and 12th night is the period of debauchery and sin, a period of time of no hope. Ash Wednesday, the sacrifice and hope for mankind. So there you have the plan of the connection between the two. It is the Fat Tuesday is the day that sin gives way to repentance. Bourbon Street's closed here in New Orleans and around the world. They have their other events. In fact, I was asked an interesting question the other day. It's like, does Mardi Gras have anything to do with the rest of the world? He says, because it seems like everybody seems to be involved in some way, shape, or form. Here's what you need to remember. Whether they have a Mardi Gras or not, if they're tied into the Catholic Church and the Protestant who come out of that, Lent is tied to Mardi Gras. And every Catholic keeps Lent. So whether they have Mardi Gras or not, it's all tied into the plan of deception. So whether it has Fat Tuesday in your area or not, it doesn't matter. The plan is in place. So then at midnight, we showed you before how Rex, the king of Carnival, meets with Comus of all the festivities. They bring it to a close. At that midnight, the church opens up on what's called Ash Wednesday, and people go in and takes like the sacrifice of Christ on a Wednesday, which the Bible talks about that Christ was crucified in the midst of the weeks, and begins to repent and bring them all the way to Easter. All right, so God's calendar plan stands with Satan's counterfeit plan. Let me put this together and put it down where we can all understand what's going on. This is absolutely amazing. And I know I've never seen it before, this way before. So we're going to put it together to the plan of what we're talking about. In God's plan, we talked about here, I'm putting in the calendars, and then we're going to go back and we're going to bring in God's calendar for his 7 months for his plan of salvation and his holy days. All right, so there. Passover is either in April or March, because God's calendar is based on the Hebrew calendar, not the Roman calendar that people use today. So God's calendar is 360 days, and every now and then you got a 13th year being put in. So at some point in time, there's either a 13-month or a 12-month period. So Passover will fall sometime in late March or April, and sometimes with the rest of the day will be September, October for the fall holy days. Then you have, after Passover, you have the 7 days of unleavened bread, and what's very important in the way is the wave sheath that falls in between the two holy days on God's spring holy days, and it always fell on a Sunday. It was on the morrow after the Sabbath, was the counting that God gave the Hebrews, which is interesting because of that. Easter is always pinned on Sunday because Satan doesn't want you to look at the time that pictures the ascension of Christ back to heaven. All right, so here we have the 7 weeks going forward. On the morrow after the Sabbath brings you to the fall holy days, and then you have God's plan. Now, Passover being on a Wednesday, the wave sheath was always on a Sunday. All right, that's the initial, the first time when Christ was actually crucified was always on a Wednesday. It doesn't always fall on a Wednesday anymore because God's days do not coincide with the Roman holiday or the Roman calendar. You have to understand that Passover is always the 14th day of the first month on God's calendar. That's why it always moves. The only thing doesn't is the pinning of the wave sheet that always fell on the morrow after the Sabbath, inclusive of the holy days. That is why Easter was always pinned on a Sunday. Easter always falls on a Sunday also. So it's a counterfeit plan. Now, we're going to give you, in the next couple of weeks, another sermon. It's going to be called The Greatest Deception Ever Perpetrated on Mankind. And we're going to go through, like we did with Christmas and like we did with Mardi Gras, we're going to go through Easter and show you how that plan of deception was put into place. Satan's holiday season comes to a close on Easter as God's holy day season begins on Passover, all around the same time. Now, it goes back ways from Easter coming all the way back into November for Satan's plan. So now let's put these together in Satan's counterfeit plan and put them together. So God's holy days start in April. Satan's holidays start in October. Now, sometimes it's March and sometimes it's September. I'm using these dates today just for purposes of explaining the time. Either one shifts, the 7 months shifts. It's still with a 7-month plan. So this is what we have in God's plan for salvation. All right, you have the months that God's plan is from April to October, and Satan's plan is from October to April. Just the opposite. See how they reverse one another? Is that Satan is always trying to step in on God's plan, and you'll see them reverse. And so it's like Satan tries to anchor around God's plan so nobody, so like keeping it into a little button. All right, so now we have the months. We have the 7 months coming in of the holy days or his holidays. Now, these are God's calendar months, and you'll see that God's calendar always begins on the 1st of Nisan or Iyar, and so you have all the way through on the Hebrew months you're looking at that I just wanted to put in for everyone's information. So now I'm taking that chart, and I just reduced it so I can explain to you now what we're looking at. God's plan is 7,000 years. Like a week, 7 days, or 7,000 years. He has 7 holy days, and it takes place during the growing months. So in God's plan, around March or April is the springtime is coming in, the seasons are warming up, the time for planting and for growing, producing fruit. Just like we said with the financial debt clock, that's the fruit. You always go by the fruit. It also has a plan that takes 7 days and a week. Satan's plan of deception is 7,000 years, 7 holidays, and also takes place during the non-growing months. So as the season comes to a close and winter's coming in, there's no more production. Well, that's when Satan's plan kicks into place because he wants to destroy all fruit. He also talks about 7 days in the week. All right, so now you got the exact same thing going on. So now, God's holy days. All right, here's God's holy days, and if you're new to this, you need to understand the holy days. Go to Leviticus 23. God has 7 holy days. Passover is not a holy day. That's the crucifixion of Christ. But the days of unleavened bread has 2 holy days, a first day and the 7th day, 2 holy days. The next holy day is in Pentecost, which is 50 days later, and you see that Acts 2 people talk about with the birth of the New Testament church. You also see it in the Old Testament at the time of the giving of the law in Exodus 20. Then in the fall season, you have trumpets, atonement, Tabernacles and the last great day. You have 4 holy days that complete the 7 days that are in the fall season that center around the return of Jesus Christ, the millennial reign, and the new heaven and the new earth in the second resurrection with the last great day. All right, so there's God's 7 holy days. Now let's look at Satan. You have Christmas. So then here we have 12th night, Mardi Gras, Lent, Good Friday, and Easter. All right, so that's 6. We're missing one. All right. So what day are we missing in God's plan? All right. Halloween, which is called All Souls Day, which is on October 31st every year, and All Souls Day is November 1st. It is the beginning of Satan's plan. It reminds us of something else. Here's what it reminds us of, because you see, he has to have a counterfeit of everything that God has. The counterfeit is in this. Genesis 1, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Now, what are we looking at with Easter and the All Souls Day? It is a time when we see the spirits of the dead come to life and inhabit this world. It was seen as a time when the boundary between this world and the other world thinned, and the spirits of the dead roamed the earth. Just like we're looking at in Genesis chapter 1, when God's Spirit roamed the earth, when Satan's plan at the beginning of his 7 months, he has his spirits roaming the earth, just like God. And so what we're looking at is a complete counterfeit plan of God. All right, so there you have it. The plan of God, Satan, the counterfeit, just like we have with God's plan. But there's one more day that Satan has introduced to create the complete counterfeit. Because when you look at Leviticus 23, you see that the very first holy day that God says we're to keep is the Sabbath day. So Satan also has to change that day also. So on this vital piece, the one last missing piece in this plan, it is the weekly connection of God's people to Him, which is established from creation, which is the Sabbath day. So with the Sabbath being changed to a Sunday, the day of sun worship, the day that Jesus Christ tells us is a day, the Sabbath day, is the day to refrain from our work to draw close to Him. Satan has taken that day now and moved it to Sunday, the day of sun worship. And he has placed his most important day of his plan of deception on a Sunday and Sunday morning. You can read about that in Ezekiel chapter 8. And we're going to talk about that in the next time I deliver the sermon, the greatest fraud ever perpetrated on mankind, and how this world has bought this lock, stock, and barrel. Leviticus 23, verses 2 and 3 said, this is the beginning. It begins with the Sabbath day and it says, speak to the children of Israel and say unto them concerning the feast of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations. Even these are my feasts. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings. That day is critical to be kept. But not only that day, as we just showed you, all of God's holy days that are still in place. In Exodus 31, God says this. This is the way God says that we are His people. Truly my Sabbaths you shall keep. It is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord that does sanctify you. The fact that you keep the Sabbath day is how God separates us from the rest of the world, and He sets us apart as holy people on His Sabbath day. All right, we hope you enjoyed that segment on Mardi Gras in part 3, but you can go online, and all 3 of those videos that we reference throughout those segments, they're available to you. Just download them and you can play them. In fact, download and play them to your services, your Sabbath service, and you'll get a lot out of that. All right, let's begin to wrap it up now. January 28, 2022. There's the series that I was just referring to. December 25th, the day of the invincible sun, the biblical mystery of Mardi Gras, and the greatest fraud ever perpetrated on mankind. A lot of information that this world does not know. Alrighty, in the mail last week, excuse me, Conduct Worthy by Chuck Hunt, and we sent out a news and nuggets to go along with that from January 14th. All right, January 14th, news and nuggets. All right, in the mail, actually last week, or actually it was 2 weeks ago, we sent out the January newsletter and the DVD offering of Repairing the Breach, Preparing for Your Destiny. And actually this week, we'll be sending out the February newsletter because we're already at the end of the month, and I'll bring you that next week. We'll talk a little bit more about that. All righty, that's it for our program today. A lot there. Well, I hope you can absorb it all. All right, let's close the program down. Let's see if we can pick up just a little bit and leave you in a better frame of mind. Our closing video today is All Things Work Together. Take a look, and we'll be back to close the program. All right, welcome back. All right, that's it for our program today. Wow, I love the beat of that last part of that song there. It's almost kind of got a Western beat to it and moving on. All right, that's it for our program today. All right, as we tell you every week, this is really important. Share this with everyone you know. They're going to love you for it. Or not. Till next week, God be with you.